Hey everybody, welcome to Stop LAPD Spying Coalition Tuesday webinar. My name is Hamid Khan with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I go by he, him. And today is our fourth Tuesday, both a working meeting and a webinar. Today is also our 48th webinar since we started doing these as of March of last year when COVID started. This is in lieu of, just where we would meet. We're based out of Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles, where we would meet on the regular every Tuesday and then talk about different issues, how they impact our lives, and particularly how they intersect the national security police state, but also as a way to do some knowledge exchange, do some deep diving, but really build community-based knowledge, build that power from the ground up rather than from the top down, and leave that conversation at a 30,000-foot level. So as usual, so we have a couple logistical things where we are recording this thing. And secondly, as folks are checking in, they would see that they have been muted, and because we've had our own little share of Zoom bombing here and there. Chat is also available, but it'll go to the hosts only. So if you want to make a comment because you want to make this a collective conversation, please either send us a message through chat or raise your hand, and we'll be able to unmute, but we'll see how the conversation goes, and then we can unmute it during the latter part of the meeting. So today is our fourth Tuesday meeting, which is about how data-driven policing is expanding and what kind of different tools it's using, how this language of predictive algorithms and analytics and machine learning and AI is becoming more and more sort of pervasive, and how these tools and what we would call pseudoscience is being used by law enforcement agencies to mask the same old outcomes of how people are impacted, how violence continues to be unleashed. But today we want to just speak more about that. How do we gather this information? That what does public records mean, and how do we file public records requests? Under what laws we pass that? How the coalition has used it very effectively, in a sense, in lieu of trying to have these ordinances being passed where there's transparency and all of that, and we know there is no transparency. So what sort of angle does the coalition take in our storytelling, and how do we weaponize these public records? We'll also speak about our lawsuit that we filed, and talk about the lawsuit, particularly about the budgeting process of the LAPD. So with that, I am going to pass it on to Shakir, and or Akil. So you all decide who wants to go first.
Yeah, I can maybe start. So yeah, welcome everybody. Yeah, we just kind of today wanted, this is a working meeting, and we wanted to kind of walk through it first, the coalition's history of using Public Records Act requests to, expose harmful practices, to expose kind of the inner workings of policing and surveillance, as well as to a process of collective study of learning together and planning and strategizing together. And so what we're going to do, I think, is first do a little bit of just kind of broad overview of the different, just like our kind of approach to using the Public Records Act and why we use that tool at this, while at the same time also kind of in other contexts organizing against the idea of police transparency or police kind of open, like police disclosure type laws as a solution to the harms of policing, and kind of what our just our approach to using Public Records Act requests is. And then I think we're going to go through some history of how Public Records Act, the coalition used Public Records Act requests with the fight against the suspicious activity reporting program years ago, and then as well as the fights around LASER and PredPol. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that we're doing around academic complicity and kind of connections between police and either academic researchers or like kind of reform groups and nonprofits and stuff that we've been just starting to do some early PRA research on, just to kind of show just what we're thinking about there, and get folks ideas on what else to what else to do in that research. And then we're going to turn to our current defund surveillance campaign, which is a fight to kind of dissect and analyze the LAPD budget, that a campaign that we began this summer with Free Radicals, an activist group that Sophie is here repping, and is kind of facilitating that campaign. So Sophie can share more about that. In that campaign, we filed a Public Records Act lawsuit last week to try to against the city of Los Angeles to force some records related to the budget out of their hands. So we'll share a little bit about that lawsuit and some of the other research that we're doing there, and some of the tools we're using, which include some stuff that we got through public records, but also just some research tools that are, related to budget documents and stuff that's online. And then, yeah, kind of based on that conversation about doing some of the budget research, we may, if folks have ideas, we could try to see if there's, just to even just to show that filing a Public Records Act request online is actually pretty straightforward. If we generate some ideas for things that we want to learn, we could even try to file one just collectively here on the screen share. So yeah, so that was kind of a rough agenda overview. Hamid, do you or someone else want to kind of jump into this point about why, what the difference is as we see it between using the Public Records Act versus kind of transparency laws, and just even the idea of transparency as something that we are fighting for?
Sure. One of the things that the coalition from the very beginning, since our inception in 2011, has been that as a fiercely as abolitionist or organization, we were not going to go down the path of reform, because reforming police is basically just is providing police with more power, providing police with more resources, providing police with more staffing, and providing police with more money. So the fight was that, but yet at the same time, how do we then find out, and how do we kind of just engage in a process that can help us better understand and do a deeper dive into the programs? So that's where, in a sense, the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, rather than pushing for legislative oversight, than pushing for regulatory oversight, rather than pushing for transparency laws, for us it was crucial that, knowing that under transparency, they would give the law enforcement agencies just give you whatever they want to give you, and then they just basically check the box. So for us, we started looking at the California Public Records Act request. Now, people have heard of FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and fundamentally, FOIA is typically used for federal agencies, which are all so any public agency that is publicly supported, primarily by public dollars, and is budgeted. They are up to one can file a public records request from that public agency, whether it's a school system, or it's a public university system, or law enforcement agency, or fire department, or county agencies. Each and any all of them are subject to these laws, which are some call them sunshine laws, some call them Public Records Act. So the California Public Records Act was passed in 1968 to provide access to individuals and residents of the state of California, or anybody else, access to documents that the folks would need. So that's basically what we have been doing. The coalition has been, for the last 7, 8, 9 years almost, have been very effectively weaponizing this process. And the purpose for us to be doing that is that, unlike in legal cases where we hear from lawyers that they file for discovery, or they filed for documents which are particular needed for a specific reason, or for a lawsuit or something. For us, it was really about how do we bring this conversation to the ground, and how do we bring this information to the community. So it's basically about storytelling, and in that storytelling, what do we want to know? So which then becomes an opportunity to expose these programs and policing from many different angles, such as, for example, like what is the thought process behind law enforcement agencies seeking funding from federal agencies for a particular program. So what would we need for that? Well, one of the things we need for that is to ask for a copy of the grant proposal, the grants that they submitted to the Department of Justice to get some money. Now, when you ask for a grant proposal, the grant proposals are set up in such a way that in which the law enforcement agency would write about the purpose for the grant, what kind of outcomes they're expecting, what kind of staffing are they going to incorporate, what sort of monies are going to be involved, how that money is going to be budgeted, and what long term, and how that has been built on previous programs. So now, by asking for that, we are now almost doing in almost like an MRI, like an X-ray of this program, like, which helps us in understanding the mentality of the program. So, and then Tiff will talk more about some of the experiences that we have, particularly around Operation Laser and all that. What all did we learn? So that becomes really critical, and then in a sense, it helps in exposing this program as well, not just from a very superficial level, not just on a very superficial layer that, well, this is what they're doing, but what are they thinking? How are they thinking? What is the history behind it? And what should we expect moving forward, where this is going? But the third thing I would say, and that's where and I'll end there, is, but in order for that to happen is that we all need to be involved in that. And that's a process the coalition has really, really built collectively, where, as parts of the community, we would sit down, and no lawyers involved at all, and we would sit down and start mapping out and start taking notes that, okay, so we'll be sitting in a room or on this Zoom call, that let's look at a program. What do we want to know? And somebody would say, I want to know the background and the history. Somebody want to say, I want to know how much money's are involved, what I was just sharing. So in a sense, what it does is that it creates not only a collective learning process, but it also it's a very power building exercise as well. Because everybody, it's not just from the top down that a document is given to us, that here, just take this, and we got this from the discovery by people who are professionals, professional lawyers, or kind of occupy a particular space. But what we are trying to do is to really demystify and decolonize all of this thing, and keep it on the ground level, that each and every one of us can have access, and each and every one of us can submit these requests. Obviously, there are certain limitations, which are law. The law kind of just restricts certain things. For example, that if you ask for documents, and if there's an open investigation going on, then they can refuse to provide those documents. So there are certain exemptions to this process as well. But typically, for the coalition, we've been able to very successfully kind of just move this process in our favor as well. Back to you, Shakir.
Sure. Thanks, Hamid. So I wanted to show, I mean, this echoes some of what you've been talking about, but uh, a couple, not long ago, maybe a couple months ago, Jamie, who is in the room, but I'm just going to reference her, put together a video that the coalition put on YouTube that is kind of, it's about 45 minutes. It's like a 101 kind of introduction to how to file CPRAs, but also how to organize, how to make CPRAs part of your organizing campaigns, and how the history of how the coalition has used them. So it echoes a little bit of what Hamid's saying, but I just want to show a couple minutes from it as a little more of this introduction, and then we can dive into talking about the particular campaigns that the coalition has used CPRA requests in the past, including suspicious activity reporting, and then the predictive policing, the organizing against LAPD predictive policing. Okay, so let me figure out how to share sound. Okay, so I think folks can see this, and let me know if you can hear it too.
So why file a PRA or a FOIA, right? And so I'm a community organizer by trade. I'm a nurse. So everything I learned about community organizing, about law enforcement, about why I've chosen to fight against law enforcement has been because of the organizing I do on the ground, the books that within my community that we've read, my own personal experiences in my life, experiencing law enforcement. And so when I came into, wanting to file a public records request, which is like a legal document, I immediately was like, well, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any experience in this. So why am I capable, or why would I file one, right? So I knew that I needed to build community power, and I needed to build the skills to be able to continue that power, to see what law enforcement was doing. And I didn't necessarily have access to a lawyer at that time, or lawyers are always, especially community-based lawyers, are always so busy with other lawsuits, and don't necessarily, if you don't have the funding to pay a lawyer to file something for this like this for you, it's a skill that you need to build, right? So also to build a culture of resistance and self-reliance. And again, the knowledge that you build, the knowledge that you gain from receiving documents from the agency, from a police department, are absolutely horrifying, yet absolutely empowering, because then you actually start to see the inner workings, the imagination, how they're mapping your communities, how they are using different tools and tactics, how they're speaking about you. And that really kind of invigorates the culture of resistance, where you understand how these programs are actually targeting you. And then also to expose the policing tactics, because a lot of times, even in this day and age around data driven policing, so much of the focus is right now, especially in LA, is constantly about police building relationships with community, right? They're always talking about community policing, how we want to get to know you, we want to be able to serve you better. But what they're not talking about is the massive amounts of infrastructure they're building, of data and technology they're building in order to trace and track community members, and how they are using that data. Nor are they talking about how there is flaws in what they're executing as well. So it's really important to use this tool to expose what they're doing. And then also, again, just to clarify, again, transparency as a tactic and not the goal of abolition. Abolition is the complete dismantlement of policing. So, so these are some reasons why the coalition, the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, files public records request. It's really a journey about mapping. It's a journey about discovering exactly how, the logistics behind policing, and then building that community power and building that community resistance, and that skill and self-reliance to take on a fight like this.
I'm still muted. Yeah, so yeah, with that kind of introduction, maybe I will put Jamie on the spot. Jamie, is there anything you want to add to that before we start diving into some of the specifics, or anyone else who was kind of involved for some of that past stuff? Tiff, Akil, Chella.
Hey, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And that was really exciting, because it's part of our, basically we're building an archive. So all of our work starts to become intertwined. And so that is kind of a part of another community building educational tool that hopefully, we build, like, that knowledge of how to file different public records requests, how other people do it, and how it becomes more of a tool to build power. And I think that's one of the most important things that I think about, because these journeys are long. even though we need immediate results, I think that the more that we like understand why we're doing it, and we are not settling for just transparency, which is what you see a lot right now. Yeah, I think that's what's really important. So I really appreciate that. Kind of getting back from a long vacation, so thanks for putting me on the spot. South LAPD Spying can always count on you all. It's like jazz. We just kind of make it happen and share the knowledge. So awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, what you just said about transparency reminds me of something that I wanted to share, which is like, in the kind of organizing that the coalition has been doing against, like specifically against some of these transparency laws and transparency ordinances and oversight, like kind of surveillance oversight laws that are being passed in some cities that create kind of, formal mechanisms for like that the police have to file reports about their use of surveillance. They have to file like an impact kind of data analysis of how they're using these tools. Oftentimes what we've, especially as we resist those and organize against them and say that they are kind of, very the opposite of abolitionist organizing around this stuff, because they create like a pathway for police to claim community approval of their technology, or to claim, okay, yeah, we're ticking all the boxes and we're doing things in a legally, sound and bureaucratically sound way. Oftentimes defenders of the law say, no, well, this law is just as, it's no different from FOIL or FOIA or, these public records type laws. All it is, like, why would you be opposed to that? All it is saying is that the police have to turn over their stuff. And so, I've kind of, I remember when that's come up, had to think about, okay, well, what is the difference? I mean, is that true? And I think it's not, because I think sort of, the crucial difference, just even on just the basics, the crucial difference is that in those types of laws, like that's creating a mechanism for the police department to themselves produce a report that is spinning and framing their harm in the way that they want to frame it. So they're obviously going to do that on their own terms. They're going to be kind of consistent with how the police state views communities and views us. They're naming the kind of what they think is the state's truth of what the harm or the experience of that surveillance and that policing tactic is, rather than the community naming it. On the other hand, these tools like the PRA, what we're doing is we're exposing records, I think, that are secret, that are otherwise, just hidden. And we're not just using that as a, it's not just like an automatic, like, we're saying that they need to be posting everything online. Rather, we're doing that as this process of research, as this process of storytelling and kind of collective learning and exposing that Jamie and Hamid were just talking about. So yeah, so that's kind of, a difference, because I think we're now seeing a lot of people specifically say, oh yeah, we're just building on the model of laws like the PRA, laws like FOIA and FOIL to create, more transparency for surveillance where it doesn't exist. And I think there's a really clear distinction between those types of laws and how we're using the PRA. And even like the PRA itself is not, I don't think anyone would say that it's like, an abolitionist piece of legislation, like, or anything like that. It's the friends that you make along the way. It's the way that we're using it that is in service of abolitionist organizing, not the law itself.
Got a quick question from Audrey. The question is it best strategy for someone filing a CPRA to make sure nobody else is filing one for the same documentation? Or is it good to have numerous different people requesting the same documents so they can compare and contrast what they provided or what is provided? Jamie, anybody else?
Yeah, Jamie, too, if I kill any of you, or I can jump into it.
Sure, I can. I mean, I think that's like a really good question, because even as we look at the various public records request fights that the coalition has been involved in, I'll speak particularly to the LASER, our fight against Operation LASER, that predictive policing program. We actually filed an initial public records request that was actually drafted with someone with more of a legal lens. And then the second one that we drafted as a community, that we actually wrote together as a community, my point is bringing up the first one is that they did kind of like a document dump on us, right? And then the second, so then we filed again because like I didn't even know how to go through all the documents. They were just like receipts and they were random and it was just like a pile of mess. And then the second one, we actually had to sue them, but then they released documents after we filed. We got all kinds of information that we hadn't gotten in the first dump. So that's kind of speaking to a little bit of what you're saying, but I definitely think that being strategic with it is good, but something that really concerns me is that they're also, especially in Los Angeles, they're kind of onto who is who, right? That's who the police are. Their point is to surveil and watch people. But, you know, people are still getting all kinds of documents. And so I would just wonder, like, because we've already gotten documents saying that, you know, Stop LAPD spying is like, you know, writing too many PRAs. So trying to subvert that or go around that, I think is important. I think asking in several ways is really important. But yeah, I mean, it's not a bad strategy. It kind of like we had to do that ourselves. But it, you know, it was coming from the same organization, but we asked about documents twice about the same program. And the second hit was the best. The third one we wrote on that program, because then once we found out more about the program, then we were able to ask even better questions. And Tiff can probably speak to that. But Tiff, Court, and I feel like we wrote an amazing public records request that was all about mapping, and we're still getting information from that public records request. Horrifying information, but we just knew what to ask for because we were learning more. So that's what's kind of good also about doing a little bit of research and finding out, especially through LA's city porthole that they have, is that seeing what is information's out there already about the topic so that you can use particular phrases and things and, you know, not only grow your own knowledge, grow your knowledge with the people you're building knowledge with, right? Because I think that's one thing you know, now that I'm thinking about this a little bit more, that I think is really important is that, I mean, just to get documents and to not be organized to do something with them, to build power, to build knowledge, to build power, kind of like, I don't know, it's like, then what are we doing? You know, we're just kind of, it's like almost like a cheap thrill. We're just getting documents, right? We're just getting documents. But and that's why if there's enough of us that are organized around an issue, especially like policing, when these documents surface, then we not only grow our knowledge with each other, but then we can like operationalize them. We can use them as tools to like throw wrenches, you know, and throw bricks and, you know, actually weaponize them to do something. So I think that's something that's really important. I was having that thought before just listening to folks talking. But yeah, so I mean, a long answer to a very short question, but thanks, Audrey. I think that, yeah, you know, multiple tactics, but the most important thing is to do something with the information, you know, share knowledge and build power.
Right. Thank you, Jamie. Anybody else wants to comment on that? Akhil, Tiff? Okay, cool. So I think it's also just adding to that real quickly that now, particularly with the LAPD and different agencies have different systems in place as well. What they have started doing is that, to your point, Audrey, that while, you know, I think it's a great idea, at least I would support that yeah, let's go at them from different angles. And see even if piecemeal we can weave a story together. But increasingly what the LAPD is doing is that if they have released documents similar to what you're asking for, they are not going to release them to you. They will point to you to that publicly available CPRA number on their portal, which is now electronically available, so you can access those documents from there as well. So, for example, we have recently been getting, I mean, some of the stuff from the LAPD where they have pointed us to, and all of this ring stuff that came up, that actually had come to us through another information as well, as to what was the relationship between Ring Technology, the company, and LAPD themselves. We got a whole trove of documents out of that as well, which someone else had requested. So there are different strategies as you move around. That's why it's critical that we need to really bring this conversation down to the community, and not really, it can't be just colonized within legal offices and things like that. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I would just add to that yeah, I don't think you should ever feel obligated. If you want to find something out, you can file it, and if they've already disclosed it to someone else, that's then they'll point you to that. So it's not like you're not gonna get in trouble for asking for something that someone else has already requested. But it is interesting sometimes to the portal, the LAPD's CPRA portal makes available all the past ones. So sometimes just digging around in there, or doing a search, you might find like I've found things on there that I hadn't thought to ask for that turned out to be really interesting. And I know Tiff, you poked around in there and found things like that too. So it's interesting to go look there, but it's not, yeah, you shouldn't feel obligated to do that. Okay, should we talk about SAR? I don't know, Hamid, Jamie, one of you who knows about that?
Sure. So what Shakir is talking about is the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, which was launched in the aftermath of the 9/11 Commission report, where in 2004, Congress passed a law which is known as the Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act. And the main premise of that law was for the executive branch, in that case, the president, to create a massive information sharing environment where supposedly the information could move both horizontally between agencies and vertically, and through various sectors, corporations, public sectors, private sectors, international agencies, and others as well. So in that, so that was the first campaign that the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition launched to our fight against suspicious activity, because what it was doing was it really kind of reshaped policing in many different ways. Number one, that how it created a standard which was a watered down version of a watered down version. So in this case, for example, the probable cause has been one of the standards that has been used in the criminal injustice system, which was then watered down in the 1960s to reasonable suspicion. But then the Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative watered it down even further and called it reasonable indication. So in a sense, they define suspicion as observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of criminal and or terrorist activity. So now, in a sense, what they did was that this program came out of the Director of National Intelligence Office, and LAPD was the first law enforcement agency in the country to incorporate this program in March of 2008. And the two central pieces of this were behavioral surveillance and data mining. So they created these almost like gang injunctions. They created these standards that if they were observed by a law enforcement agency, by a law enforcement officer, and then they started a companion program in 2009 called iWatch, See Something, Say Something, that either law enforcement or one of the community informants or a snitch, they would call law enforcement agency, and the activities that they considered suspicious were taking pictures, photographs in public, using video cameras in public, just walking into infrastructures, asking about hours of operation, on and on and on, with the claim that while these may be constitutionally protected activities, but yet at the same time they may show us something that this may be thinking of, a person may be thinking of doing something wrong. So now SAR became a thought policing mechanism. It was very much hunch-based and speculation-based as well. So that was one of the first campaigns. So the coalition basically filed its first public records request back in April of 2012. And that's when we launched the campaign. The LAPD, and I guess this was the first time that they were being pushed on some of these programs, while other agencies had been doing that too, but a whole coordinated grassroots effort was now underway. So they basically hummed and hawed. They even, instead of responding to us, they held a community forum to speak about it and try to sanitize this thing. We're like, no, we're not going to go anywhere. And so it took us a while, and finally we had to go to court. Finally, we had to go to court to get this information from them. And what we wanted was also a list of people who could they had put in these secret files, because what will happen is that if you are observed, your information will be taken. It'll be put in a suspicious activity report, which then is supposed to be vetted by local commander and LAPD's counterterrorism bureau. And from there, that if it has any nexus to terrorism or criminal activity, and then it's sent to the fusion centers to be further vetted over there. Fusion centers are these warehouses. They're like these spy centers all around the country. One of the biggest ones is in Norwalk in East Los Angeles County. So they, and this was, a lot of lawyers that we spoke to were like, look, we want to file this lawsuit. And this is when we brought the lawyers in. They were like, no, this is a national security program. They're going to claim exemptions, this, that, and the other. And finally, just kudos to one of our movement lawyers, Colleen Flynn, who was like, heck with that, let's just go file it. We got to do it. So we ended up filing that lawsuit, and we ended up receiving a bunch of documents. The only thing was that they sent us information of what they had closed as their investigative files, because they said this is the only thing that has been closed as well. So the point here being that they will try their best. They start off immediately as a boilerplate response that that because the Public Records Act allows them to have 14 days grace period, supposedly to gather information. So then the correspondence will begin. That we are looking for documents, we want another 14 days. We're looking for documents, we want another month. So the point here being that we need to stick with that. We need to really, really just be very firm about it. Like, okay, sometimes they'll come back, and if you ask for emails, they'll say, because with SARS, we wanted to have information between fusion centers, the FBI, and the LAPD. They said that we have, I don't know, something like 500,000 emails. So they even tried to kind of just start a stonewall with that. So we sat down and we said, okay, well, look for these words in these emails as well. So again, I mean, it is a process, but it requires a very meticulous effort. But it's a really very empowering process, because it's a collective process, and community can come together and really kind of just drive these points and make them and really hold their feet to the fire. And then if everything else fails, and that was a winning lawsuit, and there was attorney's fees and all of that they had to give out. So just wanted to share that information.
Amit, do you think you could, hi everybody, I'm Akhil from Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Do you think you could talk a little bit about the early days of the coalition and how PRAs were a tool of base building and political education and coalition building with other organizations around SAR? Like, what did that process look like specifically related to the public records request?
Yeah. So Jamie, you're a veteran in the coalition, and you started with the coalition like a few months, like we're almost right there when we were, the public. So you're like one of the almost like the earliest leaders in the coalition. So please chime in. I think in order for that for me to talk about it, Akhil, I'll just take a step back a little bit further as well. That the coalition started off as a grassroots campaign and a fight. It didn't start off in a top-down like with a legal intent, or it didn't start off with like pushing for legislative proposal. It didn't start off as it was fiercely abolitionist, and even to the extent to oppose people who otherwise would be taking other sort of stances as well, and negotiating with law enforcement and meeting with the LAPD and all this, that, and the other. Because no, our goal was that we have to build community power, because for years and years and years, this knowledge has been held by nonprofit law firms like the ACLUs and other, but that conversation has never happened on the street. Right. So unlike the immigrant rights movement, unlike the gender justice movement, unlike economic justice movement, there's not been a movement, a grassroots, if you will, around the national security police state. So what we did was we even educated ourselves. We spent the first 8 months or so on the street. We're based out of Skid Row, talking to people to even check our own language, like what presumptions that we were walking in with, to understand that how are people thinking of being a suspect body. And that was incredibly instructive in helping develop our own language. So spend time talking to people in Skid Row and Skid Row residents, literally people sitting in their tents or coming to LACAN, which is our home, in downtown Los Angeles, to the office and speaking about it. We spent time talking to day laborers, because when you look at the iWatch program, day laborers are always out there in the neighborhoods, and cops are called in, and like a suspicious person out there, and there's so much racial violence going on. So spoke to day laborers as to, what has their experience been. Talk to members of Gender Justice LA. And I think that was the first time that I may have met Chella as well, or maybe, yeah, right around about 7-8 years ago. That that what are some of the things that, how are you are folks really thinking about these surveillance and spying and infiltration? Talk to dreamers, undocumented youth. So that helps. From there, the story begins. Then to kind of see, like, okay, now let's look at it programmatically. And suspicious activity reporting was the first program, which then led to us publishing the People's Audit of Suspicious Activity Reporting Program. That was the first report that we published, which was very much a community-driven, and that was in March of 2013. That was a community-driven, grassroots, community-based participatory research where we did about 15 or so, or 12 or 15 focus groups, where we did over 300 surveys on the street, and then we did the analysis based on people kind of understanding what this bogus program is based on speculation and hunch. So public records really become a very powerful tool for community education and power building as well. I don't know, Jamie, if you want to add something to that. I guess not.
Okay, well then, yeah, then also, yeah, thanks, Hamid, for all that overview and that history, and talking about how it was used in that fight. I know that some of what came out of that then also, of course, led to the, help set the groundwork and for the coalition's fights against LASER and PredPol, LAPD's predictive policing programs, which I've heard the PRAs are also part of kind of designing from the start too. So Tiff or Jamie, if you want to, kind of share about how the role of PRA is in that community research and those community organizing campaigns.
Hi, can folks hear me?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is Tiff, they, them pronouns with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Yeah, really excited to be here tonight with folks. So I joined the fight against predictive policing. I believe it was in at the end, it was in 2017 sometime, and Jamie was running that fight, and which had started, I believe, in 2016. And essentially, so Operation LASER, this is a program that folks are familiar with, I'm sure. It was started by LAPD in 2011. The goal was that they claimed was to decrease gun violence. And the way that the program claimed to do this was to look at crime data, look at crime information, and to analyze it, and then to use that to objectively pick locations and people that they would police, that they would target with policing, so that they were being very specific with who they were policing and where they were policing, and decrease gun violence by applying this very specific focused policing in these locations and around these people, these folks. And folks who were targeted by Operation LASER, these were, they were labeled chronic offenders. The database that folks were kept in, it was called the Chronic Offender Database, and the bulletins that were created on people, those are chronic offender bulletins. And that's part of the information that we knew that we wanted to get our hands on right from the start. But essentially, so when, and Jamie, perhaps you can correct me on how this, how how it all started, but there was very little information in the beginning of this fight against Operation Laser. Like, we had some understanding of what was being done. We had heard some of these terms, but what was very unclear and that we wanted to get more information about was, how is LAPD selecting these locations? How are people being targeted? What is this process? And to get more information about that, there was a series of PRAs that were filed. The first one, I believe, was in 2016. That was to learn more about the program overall. The second PRA, and this is the one that I kind of got more familiar with the program, that was in May of 2017. And based on that information that folks had already gathered from the first PRA and started uncovering that information, we were able to be a little bit more specific in our request for the second one. And some of the information that we asked for in the second request in 2017 was to know, okay, how are these chronic offenders being selected? Which divisions are being are using laser? So where is this being used? How is this program being funded? How is it being evaluated? And then finally, we asked for the chronic offender bulletins. We want to know who is on this list, who is being targeted by this program, because it was very clear by that point that this was a secretive list that LAPD was running, had been running, unknown to the community. It wasn't clear how people were on the list. And so, yeah, part of the biggest part of what we wanted to know was who are on those chronic offender bulletins. And I'll just pause a second. Jamie, did you want to add anything there, or?
No, that was a really great kind of overview. And I think one thing to note that was really unique about both of those public records requests is that the first one was really drafted from a legal kind of lens. And it was interesting, the tactic of how LAPD kind of really basically had us, Hamid and I actually went into a room, they like slapped down all these papers and said, okay, do you want them or do you not? And you have to pay to photocopy them. And I was like, what? Like, this is a mess. And there were a lot of receipts, just kind of random information. And the second request was written actually in a meeting where basically we were just like, what do we want to know? Because the first one that came was really discouraging, and the information that came was really difficult to sift through because it was so, like, it was a document dump, you know? And there was like not a lot of, I didn't have a lot of experience, and, you know, everybody that was in that working group, we didn't have a lot of experience, and we're all volunteers, right? Trying to figure out. And then the second one, because this was interesting, how they tried to ignore us for like a good, I think we let it go. I think their last communication to us was in July of 2017. And then we filed lawsuit in February 2018. And so we let it, like, you know, they had a couple communications, like they were going to get back to us, and we kind of just were like, okay, we're going to let it sit. And we were learning, and we were building power, and we were, you know, building a team of people, kind of coming to an understanding about laser through our own research, and you know, really also building power publicly as well. And then when we filed lawsuit, there was so much public pressure already that what they dumped on us was way more cohesive and way more understanding. And they were trying to, like, okay, lawsuit's mute, we gave you everything, we've answered every question. But at that point, like, you know, Tiff had joined on, Courtney Eccles was there, and we had built such a, like, an immense amount of team that we're like, no. Like, wait. And we were able to kind of like in a grassroots way, start figuring out, like, do we make an Excel spreadsheet? Do we just take notes? I mean, I had, and I'm so unorganized, I had like just papers, like, you know, maps drawn of like what I was seeing, and you know, and it was very like not professional, like, you know, not someone sitting here who knows what the hell they're doing. And I think that's probably the beauty of that, was that first like kind of growth spurt. And I think when we think about these stories that we tell, like, those are the stories that I find so effective, because not only are we like talking about like getting down to the nitty gritty, knowing the program and finding the information and, you know, suing them, surprise, and like all these kind of like dramatic components of it. But the beautiful part about it was not only the knowledge that was built, but that the power that really made that lawsuit effective. Because if there had not been effective pressure from like LA Can, who was one of our biggest partners, they, you know, who knows what would have happened. But there was such a kind of, what do they call, diversity of tactics that was going on, that all of a sudden it became weaponized. And I think that's the piece where we have to not fall into the legal, you know, the legal shit is going to save us. Like, it's not going to. It's going to add a tool for us to do something with, but we also have to unlearn the fact that we want transparency, because in LA right now, I mean, when we get into talking about defund surveillance, they have people that are coming in that want to make a transparent procurement process for LAPD weaponry. So they're like, oh, we're going to make it all transparent. You guys will know everything they're buying. They are already working on that. There are people that are coming not from LA, but from other places coming in to make that transparency thing happen. And so we have to really, like, when we talk about public records requests, what is it about them that makes them powerful? And it's not the law. It's not the transparency that makes them powerful. They're a tool for organizing.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, and it was great. You're right. Like it was such a process. Like when we would receive these documents, this information, and it would be like this thrill of like getting information. Like, yes, like we're getting these documents. But then it was like going through them. It was such a long process. But it was also really awesome to figure out, like, how do you do that? Like when you were like, okay, we need, you know, let's gather folks that are interested in looking through these documents and learning more. But then it's like, okay, you're looking through documents and you're like, okay, and let's figure out, like, what are we learning that's new? And people are like, well, what's, you know, what do we know already? And then so it's like this, it was just a long process of like bringing folks together and figuring out, like, yeah, how do we do this? And how do we build these teams? And it just, like, I always think of it in terms of like layers of, it's like layers of learning. And I still feel that way about, like, with PRA documents, like that we're still, like, we've received some that we're still only now realizing, like, what is the significance of that document? So it's just like a series of like learning information and building on it and sharing information with others. And then you may meet someone at a meeting, and that, you know, that information that you learned about this program that was being used at this time, you're seeing how to make a connection to something that they perhaps experienced or have learned. So it's very much, yeah, it's an ongoing process of kind of building information learning, information sharing. But yeah, it's a really awesome process. So we went through, yeah, with Operation Laser, we went through a series of PRAs, and it was that second one, that one in 2017 that they didn't respond to, as Jamie said, it was 8 months. And after announcing the lawsuit in February 2018, that was when they did start responding to us. Like, surprise, they started responding to us. And they started sending us documents, but we started like going through them very methodically and looking at, like, okay, what are they giving us? What are they answering? What are they not answering? And we were able to kind of show that and demonstrate, like, no, they're not giving us all the information. They're still withholding things. And the information, the specific point that we wanted about release the chronic offender bulletins, they were giving us excuses and reasons that didn't hold up. Like, they were saying, well, this is private information. This is very private information about people that we don't want out there. And we knew that was not true. We're like, well, we can find an example of a chronic offender bulletin right now online in a presentation that was shared by one of your officers, and it's still got the person's, you know, picture and social security number on it. So we know that you don't, you know, hold this information near and dear and value the privacy of it. So we kind of like went through methodically and took apart their excuses and their reasons why, and worked with our lawyers to push back on those reasons in the lawsuit. And as Jamie said, at the same time, doing a number of other things to be building power and to be sharing the information that we had, like the information that we got from the documents that went into that report that was released, the community-based report before the bullet hits the body. Like, that information that we got, that we obtained, that were obtained through the PRA, went into that report So it could be shared with folks, and it could become like this reference for folks, and also a call to action to say, join this fight. You know, this is all the bullshit that's going on, and then these are the ways that we're debunking it, and to call folks to join this fight. So yeah, and ultimately, yeah, it was a process of, like with a lawsuit, it was a process of kind of going back and forth with rejecting some of their arguments, looking for more evidence, laying out the reasons why we had to demonstrate why is this information of value to the community? Why do we believe that this information should be released? Why should it be released to the coalition? So we had to kind of go through that process of proving why, presenting that to our lawyers so that they could make that fight in court. And then ultimately, LAPD did agree to release a certain number of those chronic offender bulletins. So that was a victory for the community that had been demanding, we want to know these names, we want this information. Yeah, so I'll just pause there, and Jamie or anyone else, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say that we were also able to light a fire in front of LAPD's main CSOC, the Community Safety Operations Center in Central Division. And that was one of the big benefits of the CPRA information that we received, where we found out that Community Safety Operations Center existed. And then we made public demands wanting to know where they were. And then we went and lit a fire in front of one of the CSOCs in Central Division. And that was really amazing too. And the fire department showed up and they realized it was a nice contained fire, and people were dancing and drumming and eating, and they left us alone. So that's another way that PRAs get operationalized, and they bring people together, and they show power, and
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing, and that is that one of the things that, like, there were so many learnings that we had by looking at the documents, but something that was really demonstrated to us by reading the documents that helped us push for an audit, that helped us push for more exposure, like at a higher level, more exposure of this program. And that was that what the documents reveal was that, it was all smoke and mirrors. So what LAPD had been presenting this program as being this like unbiased way to police people. And really what we found was that, no, it's just like, it was at its roots. It was just basically people are being put on a list based on who LAPD thinks is criminal, where are the places that they think are criminal, and putting them on a list, and then creating this like sham around that of like, but this is what the program's called, and this is what it does, and this is why it's unbiased, and this is the data we use, and creating all this language around it. So the PRA was able to expose how that was just, a bunch of crap, and just to kind of take all that away and look at, this is what it is. And so with the coalition, we talk about I'm not going to say that word right. Okay. But we talk about taking away that language and talking about like, what is this that we're talking about? And it's about racist violence. It's about the policing of Black folks, of Black communities. And so that's something that we were seeking to demonstrate by getting these documents and kind of getting to the heart of what was going on. And so that was another goal, and something that we strive to do with all of these PRAs.
Yeah, and just to add to that last point, the records that the coalition was able to expose related to the chronic offender bulletins, in particular, like the names of people who were targeted, after those came out following the lawsuit that came out in fall of 2019, the coalition has now been doing kind of outreach to the folks on those lists to hear from them about what their experience was, and to see kind of what their ideas are for how to continue the fight and to advance it and take it to the next level. And like Tiff was just saying, just as like the lawsuit, just as like the Public Records Act requests helped expose the reality of the program, which was this was just like cover for basic racist, brutal policing and targeting of people. Now we're hearing that in people's own words, and the reason we're able to hear that and know that is through that first step of this whole journey that Tiff and Jamie just kind of summarized of uncovering, learning more, fighting, like, and then also just knowing things, and as they come up in conversations, being able to point to records and all that. So now we're hearing the truth directly from the community that was targeted through the program, rather than the kind of, again, to go back to like the point I was making about transparency and auditing type things, is instead of like hearing a report on the effects of the program either from the LAPD's own words or even through the words of their inspector general, and the inspector general did do an audit of LASER and found some like legal deficiencies with, though they're not using the right protocol, and there's defects like that. Now we're actually hearing the communities, the people's kind of experience and harm of that. And one more thing I wanted to add. So yeah, Tiff, like you were saying, there's filing the request, and then you get all the records, and it's like, wow, shit, there's a ton of records. I know maybe to help kind of show some of the requests, to also to kind of help demystify them, I can show a request that the coalition filed in 2019, trying to get at kind of the uncover and expose LAPD's architecture of surveillance, or the specific kind of programs and things. And this request, because LAPD has shared files, is available, it's publicly open, which means anyone can come and view it. And so this one has, so this is just, I'm skimming, but this is and maybe folks who are involved in this could add about how the group came up with all of these requests. But these were very detailed, trying to name programs that we knew about or suspected, and so as a result of that, down here in this documents box is some of the records that they shared over time, related to the different items that we requested. And so now we're in a process of trying to organize these and study and research them together. So yeah, if folks want to be involved in that, then it's kind of happening within our data-driven working group and other just parts of the fight. So that's something that folks can get involved in. Anything more on either LASER or PredPol or this architecture of surveillance? Otherwise, I wanted to share about some of the more recent requests that we filed around academic complicity.
Just one thing quickly, do you mind if I can just pull something up on the screen? If
Yeah.
you want to pull this out, I'll pull up the same CPRA, and this is, I wanted to go back to what Audrey was asking earlier, that the items you see on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side also, for example, this is in response to when I was saying about the ring technology. They say, well, we've already published a whole bunch of information, so go look for these numbers. So this is, Audrey, where they basically can direct you to information that has already been released as a result of somebody else's request as well. So yeah, so that's what the LAPD is doing now as well.
And I think lastly too, that one of the things that these public records requests, when we think about suspicious activity reporting initiative and Operation LASER and PredPol, they ultimately serve the purpose of harm reduction, where SARS significantly reduced. And I know, Hamid, you probably have the numbers of how many thousands they were collecting a year to now they're in the 200s that they collect a year of SARS. And that's like a federal national program, right? It's not just something that LAPD developed. And Operation LASER was terminated, and so was PredPol. However, and this is what, again, is so important, and I keep coming back to this point about community building, is that these programs come back though. They come back in different forms. So as much as we pull them apart and pick them apart, they come back. And so if we haven't built a base or use this, as for any kind of organizing tool, then we're ultimately, not serving the organization purpose of them and building that longevity and building that long fight. Because now, though we exposed LASER and we did a great job of kind of making it really seen, now there is the fight of data-driven policing. And so I think, and it's kind of its own, like, we're trying to be transparent and we're trying to build with the community. And so, just like we learned, they learn and they morph. And so if we still have to like be building that base that has all the critical minds that are thinking all the different ways that we go about taking them down.
I see there's a question from Stocked 562. Oh, do we have to unmute? I don't know how to do this. Okay. If you want to just put the question in the chat, I just tried to unmute. Oh, and maybe you're unmuted now. No. Okay.
Go ahead. Try to unmute yourself, Nico. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Yeah. You want to ask the question now? I guess maybe, Nico, your mic may not be on, but okay. But if you want to type it in chat, we can always go with that too. So thank you.
Okay. Anyone, any other questions?
I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Okay, well then let me share an example of a request that is actually still pending. And so here, so you can see on the screen, it says visibility unpublished because they haven't filled it yet. But this is a request that the coalition just kind of filed this summer. And this one, maybe a slightly different background is less of like a kind of building up, trying to kind of collectively think about a campaign, more just emerged from pieces that we've been seeing in other work, for example, I think a lot of what we've been seeing, including in the records that came out about PredPol and LASER, of some names of people who we knew were academics and researchers who were either had access to records of LAPD's predictive policing systems or were instrumental in developing them, or had consulted with police on them, or had themselves researched them, mainly academics. And so we've been seeing a bunch of names, and had also seen some of these folks publishing and writing about them. So the coalition just kind of decided, well, we're seeing these folks, so let's see what their communications are with LAPD. And so, they're private individuals, but because they're communicating with the police department, those communications are public records. So so the coalition filed this request for communications and named a couple individuals whose names we'd seen in different places, who are academics and other types of researchers, trying to get their communications. I'm going to just do a quick summary through this because I think it's just helpful for seeing some of the back and forth that happens around PRAs once you file them, and kind of how diligent it helps to be in continuing to respond. So the request was filed in July. And then, later in July, they always give this response now because of COVID, we need more time. So they need more time. And then kind of going back, they tried to kind of propose narrowing it down. We then agreed, okay, like here, we'll give you a time frame, like 2009 to present. We want all communications, kind of going back and forth on that. At some point, then they asked for email addresses. So to help, facilitate the search, we said, okay, we're not saying that you don't have to search anyone else, but at a minimum, here's a couple of email addresses that you should look up. They looked that up, And then, they also just keep filing these like, we need more time, we need more time. We're please be advised, researching, blah, blah, blah. And then earlier this month, they turned over a couple sets of records for 3 of the folks that we asked for. And so those are here, and they're email communications between LAPD officials and a couple of these academics. But for some of the other ones, they said that it's 1690 emails for one of them and like 52,000 for another one. So that's too many. We don't know if we can do it. So then we responded, okay, we just responded a couple weeks ago saying, okay, for one of the person who is 1690, we don't think it's that many. And, there's an important public interest. These were emails with Jeff Brantingham, who's a UCLA academic, who was one of the architects of predictive policing, and then went on to found PredPol, the company that now sells this software across the country. And he helped develop and research and vouch for the LASER program. So he said, no, we want all of his records. As for the other person, we know he was a consultant for LAPD, so he over the years has been involved in a lot of different things. So we said, okay, for him, here's some keywords. These are the things that we're interested in. These are, again, different programs that we knew over the years that we'd seen in different places, or even just concepts that we've seen, him peddling or whatever. So we as a group came up with these keywords, and so now we're waiting on those. Just quickly to show another request, and this one's also public because it's been published, is in some of those communications, and also I think just in other records that you just found, Tiff, on like from other people's requests, we noticed that a couple of things that were these are I'm just showing this example to show, like, asking for sometimes you might know of an exact document that you're like, of an exact thing, and you just want them to give you that thing. So here we had seen an email that had an attachment of a letter sent from some UCLA or different UC faculty to the police chief, kind of vouching for that guy, Jeff Brantingham, who I mentioned. So he said, just give us this PDF. You can't really get out of this one. It's really simple. Also, another professor whose name we'd seen, give us all communications with him. And then also there's this document in one of them that just looked like kind of interesting, like what it was called, Ideas to Spark Conversation. And it was from the LAPD's communications person to the police chief. So we just asked for that. And this one, the coalition filed in January, and then actually within a month they handed this over again because it was really simple, and they couldn't really play games with it, so they just gave the 3 records there. So that's just an example of, like, see something and it's pretty straightforward sometimes. There's the kind of broader collective process and strategic way to use CPRA. Another kind of diversity of tactics is sometimes you might just want a quick and dirty, just like, oh, we know about that record, give us that record. So we've been doing this, and we're also kind of planning, building on this research into different academics collaborating with and cooperating with LAPD, is like trying to build some more kind of now to do the research and analysis of, okay, what are the different forms and examples of academic complicity, and what are the nuances it takes, and how do we report on that? So if folks are interested in that, that's also work that we're kind of a bunch of us on this call are starting to do that research, and also thinking about next requests to file. So yeah, if anyone has thoughts on that or is interested in that, then speak up or reach out. Anyone have anything to add on the academic complicity ones?
Just one more thing
Oh, go ahead, Gil.
on the quick and dirty PRAs, as you were describing it. They don't even have to have any other language other than what you want to request. And I think that Shakir said earlier that you could even, not now because of COVID, but you could just waltz into the police station and ask them for the documents too, or hand them to the police station on a Post-it. And they're still, yes, here's an example. Yeah, this doesn't have any language other than exactly what the person wants to request. So yeah, it's that simple, and you could do it in 2 seconds, and you should do it often. Yeah.
Yeah, and technically, yeah, like Akil said, I mean, like the law just says that the records have to be made available, like public records or records that belong to the agency need to be available for public inspection. So the request is just something that, you know, you could even, technically speaking, you could just send an email to a official saying, give me your records. You could do a tweet, you could show up, like whatever. LAPD has this portal that they've created that is, you know, a mechanism for doing it. And so for LAPD, that's what we do. But like in terms of what the law requires, it just is simply saying that the records need to be available. And yeah, just another example, some of our partners at White People for Black Lives, for example, I think they got a request recently showing communications between LAPD or the mayor and LAPD and DeRay McKesson, who's, you know, an uh, activist organizer person, who, you know, was behind the 8 Can't Wait campaign. And so, you know, just found these communications and records of a meeting that 8 Can't Wait people had uh, with the mayor on June 10th. So like, you know, right in the heat of the uprising, and in a moment when a lot of the community was organizing or had publicly condemned the 8 Can't Wait and had been opposing it. Now, because of these PRA requests, we were able to uncover, oh, okay, yeah, look, like there was actually this kind of, you know, back channel communication going on with the mayor that was very much antagonistic to what the community was organizing for and asking for. So again, like, if you have a curiosity about something, um, uh, sometimes it can be as simple as filing this, but also, you know, like Jamie was saying, there also can be just a the flip side of that is like, you know, make sure that what you're doing to ask for records and get the records and analyze them is part of a strategy of building power rather than just kind of, you know, the cheap thrill of getting records. Jimmy, were you gonna say? I saw your mic go off. No. Um. Okay. If no one has anything else to add, then we can maybe talk about the defund surveillance work. If you, Sophie, if you want to kick that off.
Sure, yeah. Did you want to talk about the lawsuit related to the defund surveillance stuff? And then I can show a little bit about the work that we've been doing that's kind of related to the kinds of information that we are getting from both CPRA requests and then also from what's available.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, maybe just start real quick with like, so the defund surveillance campaign, we kind of began in the summer to like do a analysis and research into LAPD's budget and both like what's actually inside the $3.1 billion that LAPD spends every year, as well as like trying to analyze and understand how that budget grew over the years. So like the kind of broader, you know, dynamics and just political developments around the budget. So, you know, kind of began looking at publicly available documents on the budget from different sources, as well as starting to file requests. And then in particular, we began, or the coalition began filing requests of LAPD's base budget. So so the way the budget process generally works is LAPD every year comes and makes a request for how much they want to increase the budget from the previous year by. So this year, for example, in November, they proposed their request, or they announced their request, which was seeking $106 million increase over last year's funding. So that request proposal had some breakdown of like what the $106 million of funding that they're trying to add, what that consists of. Like, oh, we want it because we want to buy, like, I'm making this stuff up, but it was like, you know, 2 new helicopters and a lot of money for like y'all remember this, like something like boot like
boot shining.
boot shining like the devices or some shit. And so, and it's also like obviously strategic choices about what they decide to like really put an elaborate justification for, like, oh, we need like this like diversity outreach like materials, but then a lot of things that are like bigger amounts and possibly like more important amounts are just kind of hidden. But again, that's the only justification or description breakdown was for the amount that's increased. So the 106 million, I mean, that's a ton of money. And just to speak to the context of it for a moment, is they're asking for like a massive increase in their largest budget at a time of historic revenue shortfalls. The city is facing a $750 million revenue shortfall, and on the heels of the community making really clear that we're trying to defund the police department, that we want that money diverted away from policing. So they're coming in with this request, but only that kind of fraction of the overall budget is itemized. So we've been trying to find out, okay, what about the 300 or 3 billion other dollars? Like, how is that being spent? And so the coalition submitted requests of that information, first just trying to seek it from the police commission, then filed a Public Records Act request with the LAPD, who closed it saying, oh, we don't have this information, go ask the city controller. So we went and asked the city controller, or filed a request with the city controller, who then said, go and ask LAPD, or maybe the city administrative office has it. So the coalition filed a request with that. And two, after all this back and forth, and kind of again, like I was showing with some of those other requests, like the kind of follow up and response, then eventually decided, and after not getting any records and being kind of run around and ignored in the follow up communications, last week filed a Public Records Act lawsuit, very much along the lines of the previous ones around suspicious activity reporting, as well as predictive policing that folks have been talking about. And that lawsuit again is demanding that the court force LAPD to comply with the Public Records Act obligations for turning those over. And just to talk about, so that's again like very much even in just how the lawsuit is written and how it's framed, as well as like the broader campaign around it. We're not just seeking, like Jamie was talking about with the procurement transparency stuff, is the point of the lawsuit isn't to say there needs to be more city transparency around the budget. The lawsuit, even in the way it talks about it, is very much framed around, this is all money that LAPD is spending to harm, and part of how they're able to continue growing their budget over time is the fact that they hide this. So it's as much a tool of kind of education and political mobilization around the harms of the budget and how it grows over time. And at the same time that the same day that the coalition launched the lawsuit, last week on Tuesday, coalition also hosted a press conference at the LAPD headquarters that not only announced the lawsuit, but also announced a set of campaign demands from the defense surveillance campaign. And those are demands that the work group had been putting together, through this process of researching and realizing, how the budget works. And the demands are focused, they're all about LAPD funding, but because our research wasn't just kind of focused narrowly on the technical, four corners of the budget document, the demands also go beyond just, amounts and dollars in the budget, but also trying to attack, entire programs, and trying to also confront the role of even things that actually don't cost a dollar in the budget, but we know are responsible over time for driving harm and for increasing the budget, like donations to the LAPD, like academic collaborations with LAPD, like things that start off as a pilot program funded by a nonprofit or something, but then ends up becoming a whole LAPD program or bureau. So again, taking a really kind of macro, broader, not just kind of focused on the technical or legal aspects of it, but just the political dynamics of how the budget grows and what it's used for.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, like related to what Jamie was saying earlier about how the coalition uses CPRAs as a form of organizing and public and political education in a lot of ways. We are this lawsuit that we filed, we're looking at the way that the LAPD is budgeting, also to look for ways to target different things that the LAPD is either profiting off of the LAPD, so like the different tech and academic complicities, and then also because one of the things that from doing this work is very clear is that like the ways that surveillance, especially the technology associated with surveillance, the money that goes into that, the harm that comes out of it is disproportional to like the funding that goes into it. So I think one of the things that we're realizing is, and that the coalition through you know, almost the past decade knows, is that like something that seems like a $10 million contract within the LAPD's $1.8 billion budget is a drop in the bucket. But the harm that can come out of something, when that something is like a records management system, which consolidates data and makes it possible for folks to access and analyze data in different ways, the harm from that $10 million can be disproportionately large. So that's one of the things that we're also hoping to get out of this, is to understand what those things are, how they've been continually rolled over, because as Shakir said, we know the new things that they want, but not the things that they are continuing to pay for, so that we can also target those and then also share that knowledge. So related to that, actually, one of the things that we're working on that is kind of like a pop ed piece is this zine on the budget creep, which is kind of what Shakir was talking about, where a lot of the things that the LAPD gets money for surveillance isn't necessarily covered in or visible in the LAPD's budget, because it's like the library system paying for a certain number of police officers, and then that revenue for the LAPD, and also the fact that these like whatever number of officers are being paid by the city isn't even in the LAPD's budget at all. And other things like, again, as Shakir mentioned, the ways that donations become line items, the kinds of federal funding and academic grant funding that turn into LAPD budget funding. We're making this zine around that we can hopefully share and kind of clarify the different ways that the budget works. And as part of that, we are hoping to find some numbers from the LAPD's actual expenditures. And ideally, we would also have their budget numbers, so we would know how much they're budgeting for the next year, and also generally how much they budget in general each year for different things, because right now all we have are how much they actually spent, right? Which means that it's a lot of looking for adding up different receipts essentially for what they've spent money on. And it's very hard to tell, like, okay, the LAPD is actually supposed to spend this much money on this one particular surveillance technology or something like that, because all we know is that they did spend this much money on it. And so we have, and again, in that kind of spirit of using CPRA as an organizing tool, both internally and externally, we have a group of folks who are looking at these expenditures and pulling some numbers with us. And I'm going to share right now our wish list. Anything, Shakir, Akil, Hamid, things you want to add before I do that? Okay, cool. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right, so can you all see this? Oh, and I didn't introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie, she, her. I'm with Free Radicals, and we've been working with the coalition on this defund surveillance campaign, and then previously before that on some stuff around data and algorithms, part of the PredPol fight, and then if anyone's familiar with the algorithmic ecology, the group that developed that framework and organizing tool. But right now we are focusing on this defund surveillance campaign. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions about that. We're an activist collective of all volunteers that works at the intersection of science and social justice. So very, very relevant when we're talking about surveillance, and especially the ways that we know the LAPD uses this rhetoric of, oh, okay, well, if you're gonna cut our budget for officers on the ground, you have to let us have more technology so that we can do the same amount of policing as we were before you made the budget cuts, which is the antithesis of like what we actually want, right? If we're calling for cuts to the police, we don't want cuts to the police that still let them do the exact same amount of harm they were doing before. All right, so this is our budget numbers wish list. As Jamie was talking about earlier, this is like organized in a way that kind of makes sense to us, but is also a little bit slapdash and is just, you know, a Google Doc. So it's kind of split into just general groups of kinds of numbers that we're looking for this zine, and then also a little bit more broadly than that. So for example, we have things like the LAPD's total budget for each year Garcetti has been mayor, which we actually, can you see this spreadsheet if I pull it up? Cool. So this has some of those numbers from previous research that we had done earlier, I think like late last summer, this past fall, just to get some of these numbers for the more recent years down. Especially looking at the difference between the adopted, proposed, and so the proposed budget and then the adopted budget, and then how much they actually spent for each year. And yeah, and then we have some for the ways that LAPD gets funded. You can see there's already some numbers, some research done by some of the folks in this group. So we were actually looking at this at our last meeting on Sunday and kind of mind-boggling numbers. Also the ways that this group has found that, for example, funding for Palantir or from the Urban Area Security Initiative that we thought would go directly to the LAPD actually go to the mayor. So they don't show up when you just search for the LAPD. And so we're interested now in the ways that the mayor's office is also directly complicit or spending money for the LAPD. So as we're doing this research in these expenditures, we're also learning more that we have more questions about. And hopefully if we're able to get money about the budget from the lawsuit that Shakira is talking about, or just from, you know, more CPRA requests that we're able to file, we'll be able to do more of this research and then be able to share that, put public pressure on different, I think, general public pressure against the police, and then possibly more specifically if there are different institutions that we want to go after. And that's a general summary. Anything that y'all want to add? And if anyone wants to get involved, be a part of this research, help with the strategy for this, or just be part of this kind of like research team that's looking for these numbers. The research team in particular is very flexible in terms of capacity. You can sign up to just like look for one of these things or help someone out who's already looking for one of those things, or you can sign up for like 12 things if you're really just a huge nerd. And yeah, just you can message me or any of the other hosts or co-hosts.
Sophie, if I could quickly just clarify, because we were using some numbers as well, and we were trying, if you can keep it right there. No, yeah,
Oh, yes.
yeah, just right here, because we were saying 3.1, $3.2 billion. So the overall budget for the LAPD is the numbers that folks are looking on the screen right now is their day-to-day operational monies. And when you add the liability that the city has for pensions and benefits and some of the other stuff as well, the overall budget for the LAPD is over $3 billion. At least it was in 2021 with $3.1 billion. So I just want to clarify that.
Thanks for that clarification, Hamid. I will pass it back to Shakira then.
Yeah, maybe so I could show the data that we have been kind of doing at least some versions of this research, even what Sophie was just talking about of finding like the Palantir line items and those kinds of things. Like Sophie said, there like we have access to some information about like basically the receipts, like basically like what LAPD's expenditures or the expenditures across different city departments. What's going on with the screen?
Yeah, one of you will have to close the screen. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I have too many too many monitors, so I was like trying to find where the thing is. My bad.
All good. And so yeah,
I'm so sorry,
is...
Shakir, for the there's a question here which I missed.
Oh.
What's the percentage of the police budget to the city's budget? I may have missed this fact. So
well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah. So that's a great question, and also a slightly complicated question. So one thing that we do know is that police funding takes up, I think, around 54%, over half of the city's unrestricted funding. So the city has unrestricted funding, which can be spent on anything, and they decide how to divvy that up. And then there's restricted funding, which is like for specific grants that have to go for specific things, or is already set aside for, again, specific purposes. So out of the unrestricted funding, they take, I think it's like it's over 2 million or 2 billion. It's, I think, 2.7 billion out of that unrestricted pot, which is just over 5 billion, I think. And then if you take so the city's full budget is around 10 billion, and the LAPD's full budget, which includes like pension and all of those other kind of indirect costs, is that 3.1 billion number that Hamid mentioned. So it's around 30%. And then if you look at just the operating budget, I don't know what that would come out of for the LA, for like the LA city's total budget. So usually the number that we talk about is that 54% number, because that's how much the city is choosing to put into the police. They have a choice about how to spend that money, and they decide to put that much money into the police. So hopefully that helps a little bit. It's a really good question, and it's a little complicated, but I think any of those numbers shows you that there's just a huge chunk of the city's budget that goes to police, and feel free to add anything to that.
I think why that number becomes really crucial is that the budget is always, it shows the priorities that a city have, but when you have an unrestricted amount of money, which could be spent in any which way, where restricted money would be, for example, for street sweeping or sanitation or various other services that the city provides to the city. So that is like allocated money every year. But when you have a sort of a free flow of money, I mean, for the lack of a better term, it goes to show that 73% of that goes into public safety. 54% goes to the police, and about 19% goes to the fire department. So that leaves about 27%. That's why for youth development, there's hardly less than half of 1% or something in the most meager amount. So that's why it's really important that, while overall it could show that, well, gee, it's only 31%, no, but the real money, which could bring about change and which could really be invested in people, is overwhelmingly invested in police and public safety.
And I just also want to add really quickly onto that. One of the things that we're learning more and more about as we're doing the research for this zine is that I think we found out the other day that like 700 million of transportation and airports money goes to pay for the police, which doesn't even show up in the police's own budget. So there are a ton of ways that the police get funding that is not even in that number.
Yeah, same with libraries, same with the various other departments, that it shows up in the overall budget pie chart as these other departments, but it's going into the pockets of the LAPD. And yeah, just quickly put a point on the unrestricted funds is, that number, that 54%, is also just a really crucial organizing target, because like we've been saying, there's discretion over it. And specifically right now, that's like that, how to divide up that portion of money is what the mayor is currently in the process of coming up with a budget for. And that's going to go to city council, which will hold hearings in I think May and June, and then vote on it at the end of June to go into effect in July. So those intervention points of city council, pretending like they're hearing from different people and doing hearings about it, and supposedly being responsive to the community, that's where we can show up and say, people are not asking for over half of the money that you have control over to go to police. So yeah, that's kind of some of the unrestricted or some of the earmarked stuff like pensions and other things. I mean, those are also too much, and they shouldn't be spending that. But that's not money that that we can directly apply pressure on them in the immediate term to reduce. Yeah, so okay, so that's all about the budget, as in the budget kind of proposal. Like, so this thing that's being worked through this process that I'm talking about now, of it was first introduced in November. The police chief proposed it to the police commission, and now it's part of like the citywide budget that's being negotiated by the mayor. And then come June, it's going to be in city council. That's the budget proposal. So the data, so we've been able to find, the city publishes, or the the controller publishes online this information through the system called Checkbook. That's their data on that's their kind of, so once a budget is approved, the controller is the entity that's responsible for like channeling that money to different sources. So they publish some of, like, basically, like Sophie said, the receipts of where different money is going. So there's some things that this tells us, and so you can find this if you go to like search for controller control panel. It's really confusing because it's called e-checkbook data. There's also this system that you see here called Checkbook LA that is kind of like a portal for viewing it, but it's not all of it. It's limited. If you want to see all of it, you can click like view data here, and this will bring up this kind of just like massive like spreadsheet of everything. So right now it starts alphabetically with like the Department of Aging stuff and you know, things that they're purchasing. And so I'm going to show a little bit of how we've been able to use this to search for some of the stuff like Sophie was talking about, of like the Urban Area Security Initiative funding and Palantir. But I also just want to say, I mean, what this isn't. So like, because this is just like basically receipts for like things that money was spent to every table here. So like that's an accounting of you know, that being spent that way. So we can find, so that's why like we can find out, okay, how much money was spent on Palantir, because that's something they spent on. But it's useless for telling us, for example, we want to know, okay, how much does like LAPD's Air Support Command, which is their, you know, Air Force, all their helicopters, like how much does that division overall spend? How much is that spent over the years? Or how much does their discovery unit, which is like the unit that is always that's supposed to respond to CPRA requests and is always whining that, like, you know, we're filing too many requests and they don't have resources and time, like, okay, how much are they getting compared to, for example, their public communications unit, which is basically like the propaganda arm that, like, you know, plants like puff pieces in the media and like and puts out criticism of victims of LAPD. So like that, like how the budget is divided doesn't show up in here, but this is useful for finding out, for example, like different vendors and stuff. So it's pretty easy to search, I was gonna say, but wait, how do I do the, oh yeah, filter. Okay, so yeah, like, you know, so you can kind of just create these filters, and I'm actually not even that good at Akil, I know you were saying like Boolean commands and those kinds of things. I feel like you're more nifty with those, but like you know, you can do some basic stuff in here, like for example, trying to find out, you know, so vendor name is usually who things are getting paid for. So for example, if you want to find out like how much LAPD spends on Microsoft, you might search like just like this and hit enter. And for some reason it's none. But wait, by the way, and you can also filter here departments. So we'll put department police, and instead of Microsoft, I'll start with another example like Palantir. Why is this not working? Sophie or Keel, do you remember what I might be screwing up? Oh, maybe contains. Yeah. Okay. Right. So because you know, it's not exactly Palantir, it's Palantir Technologies. So now we see all of these payments made to Palantir. And you know what? I'm actually going to take off police because, like Sophie said, a lot of it is spent through not through the police department, but here, like the mayor's department has been making payments to Palantir over the years. And, you know, this is like a couple million here. And so we see here, like, so then you can use this data to catalog, like, you know, how much is spent on Palantir. You can also go into like where the money is coming from. So some of it is coming from the general fund. So that's the money that is distributed as part of unrestricted funds, like that 54% going to police that we were talking about. But some of it is also coming from like, you know, external grants, like the US Department of Justice is like asset forfeiture money. So that's like money that prosecutors and police or federal law enforcement seize through like civil enforcement. They just, you know, can just like start an action against money and get it that way. Or through the urban UASI, stands for Urban Area Security Initiative. It's a homeland security grant making program that that funnels a lot of money to cities. So that's paying for Palantir through payments to the mayor. So we know from this, like, you know, that Homeland Security is funding, you know, and then this is 2016, 2017. So the Obama administration is funding the, you know, development of Palantir through the mayor's office in the city. So yeah, so it's pretty easy to search this, and like, you know, like actually, like when I first saw this, the first thing I put in this box was Palantir, because that's like just what I could think of and for figuring out how to do it. But like, I'm sure others will have other ideas, and like, you know, just curiosities and just things you might think about, like, oh fuck, how much are they spending on that? Like, you can just put it in here. One other thing I want to show is like I put like, okay, so like let's see, when we put Microsoft, we find that like police, it's actually not spending that much. I mean, these are all amounts in like 100,000, and you know, there's other here. I'll filter this for police here. So you know, these are, so we saw this and we were like, okay, this is like 2014 to 2017, pretty small amounts, and it stops in 2017. We know that they're still using all kinds of Microsoft like data architecture and cloud services for like their records management and all that stuff. And that's because we realized, once, instead of searching for the vendor name, if we search for it in description, which is,
And I think it's a detailed description specifically. So it might be the one right under that.
Okay.
No, this is it also, because I remember all these
okay.
right, public
sector. It might be in both.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, well, let's try. Well, here, I'll show this one, and then we can look at the other one too. It's like we realize that police are actually like, you know, and this is probably somewhat shady, but probably also just like kind of just how this bureaucracy of how it works is they're purchasing Microsoft products like for like this is in particular is, if you find the description field, which is where we searched. Oh yeah, here. This is like their enterprise agreement for, well, I don't even know what that is. Interesting. But a lot of these other like things like the 365 case management systems and that, I don't know who Wanda Watkins is. Maybe it's just like someone who signed the contract or something. But all of these like Microsoft systems, they're purchased through the vendor here is called Insight Public Sector. And then we were like, okay, what the fuck is Insight Public Sector? We just Googled it. And it's this company that does, is basically like a procurement, like, you know, the police buy Microsoft services through there. We found another one that I just want to share real quick, which was like Palantir. In that same way, we found that a bunch of Palantir stuff was purchased through this CompuCom. Never had heard of that, so we just looked it up. Interesting, of course, that as soon as you land on their page, they have this whole thing on like that we can do better, and you know, standing in solidarity of Black Lives Matter movement and condemning police killings, while at the same time selling millions of dollars of Palantir technology to the LAPD. So yeah, just these kinds of like, you know, just like have a hunch, want to look something up, and that's a lot of how we generate a lot of things on the wish list. I mean, there we generated that, as Sophia was saying, like we were like doing this zine of that kind of demystifies and breaks down like the dynamics of how the budget has grown over time, and so like we were like, oh well, we wonder how much like has been spent on this, or how much has come out of this fund or this source, and generated those. But you know, this tool here is makes it pretty easy to look stuff up and to find out about different forms of police spending. Any questions about that, or just even ideas that people? What I'd love to hear most is if people have ideas for things that they would like to search in there, and then we could even just do it now. Mamta, you're asking about the 1033 program, which Yeah, so that's the immigration enforcement. That's like the here, Mamta, if I unmute you, you can share it if you're cool to do that.
Yeah, it's selling military equipment to the police departments. The leftover military equipment to the police departments at like very cheap rates.
Yeah. So we haven't looked that up. I mean, it might be in our wish list of federal stuff, but let's see. So it might be. See, I wish you could just search across all fields, but otherwise it might be like fund type.
Well, it's really the name of a legislation, number of
Yeah.
legislation that was passed again during Clinton's time. So, and this is a direct sort of a giveaway of military grade equipment to law enforcement agencies.
You
Yeah,
know,
so I was gonna try a couple searches. I mean, we could like that's like I don't know necessarily where to find it, but like we could type in things like Department of Defense or 1033, I guess is the name of the statute, or just other things. You could try to find it in that way. One thing we did realize though is that donations to LAPD don't, this is just like receipts for payments, expenditures. So things that are granted to LAPD and that I think I don't know if there's any money that exchanges hands for the 1033 program.
No.
Okay, no, it's just stuff donated. Okay, and then also like a lot of stuff, and so even Palantir, for example, one thing that wouldn't show up in here is we know that early on Palantir I think began as a $200,000 donation from the police foundation that was funded by Target, right? So that is and so that's another kind of dynamic that we've been talking about and researching and are going to be talking about in that zine of like a lot of things come as donations to the police foundation, especially when like police don't want to go through having to get it approved, get a purchase approved. They'll just I think the police chief like just went and like, or Bratton or someone like went and like asked Target to donate it or something like that. So and then that's how we have Palantir. So 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 I think like we could like you can kind of get creative and try to find things on here. You never know what you'll find, and it's worth doing that. On that point about donations, we also have a spreadsheet that someone shared with us about a spreadsheet about like donations to, because all donations need to be approved by the police commission, like, and they kind of just pro forma just rubber stamp most of them, but they're kind of cataloged, and the inspector general has a spreadsheet of those. So we were able to, someone shared that with us, maybe it came through a PRA because it's a record that the inspector general had. So we have a spreadsheet of all those, and that's another place that we've been diving into. So if folks want to help us research, that's another thing that we have.
I'm wondering if we can just use the 1033 program to just quickly do in the last couple minutes, just to show people how easy it is to submit a records request, because considering that they're donations to police departments from the military, might not be something that shows up in a budget, but there might be public records about it. Do you think that I could share screen and show that really quickly?
Go for it, yeah.
Just because I want people to see how easy it is to do this. And so LAPD, as we've been saying, has a portal, and it's not just LAPD, but it's the whole city of LA. And it's this lacity.nextrequest.com, which I can put in the chat. And you can just make your own account in that site. And this is what it looks like when you sign in. This is the home page for that site. And then all you have to do to make a request is click right here and make request. And it'll have you fill out some info, but then all you have to do is select the department. So we would select the police department. And Mamta, what would you want to know about the 1033 program? Maybe we could just quickly brainstorm like what questions we would want to know about it. And then we could send that to the police department. Yeah, what would you have in mind? You can either say it out loud or put it into the chat.
Yeah. I mean, I think to know which of our local police departments are getting equipment from the 1033 program. There was recently um, a piece, I think it was shared amongst us, but about all the helicopters overhead. If you live in a, if you live in a neighborhood that's being surveilled, and like we have all this military grade equipment that the police departments are using, and like just completely gratuitous to have
So,
helicopters every day, right? Overhead, just surveilling. I just started noticing that a couple of years ago, and didn't know what it was until I read that that's just extra equipment they're using to surveil.
right. So every different police department is its own institution, which will either have its own portal or an email address or something that you can send a records request to. Since this is specifically the LAPD, would it be fair to say what equipment have you received from the 1033 program? Is a question that you have. So then I could even just list, any and all equipment received. And then you said something about helicopters too, right? So any records regarding helicopters, right? So, basically just list bullet points of what you want. You don't even have to say any other language here, but you can say I'm citing the California Public Records Act and I'm entitled to the following records. You can say something like, please waive all fees. This is a record in the public interest.
And also sometimes depending on what you want, like with emails, one thing you can ask for is in the native format, because otherwise they'll give you a PDF, or like I think Jamie was saying in the past, they would just make you like go and look at pieces of paper. But if you get it in the native format rather than PDF, it can be more searchable.
And we can go into more detail in a future meeting, but all you'd have to do then is just whoops, I have my contact information below, so I'm not going to scroll down. Is just press send, and then so that's how easy it is here. And I know we're a little bit over, but I just wanted to show off this website as well. This is called Muckrock, and here you can make an account, and then you can send this to any other. So let's say you want to send the same records request to another agency that's not the LAPD. Let's say LA Sheriff. You can even just type in the name of the agency here, and it'll pop up if your computer's not being buggy like mine. Check it out. It would be LA County Sheriff, right?
You might have to put in Los Angeles instead of LA.
You're right. Here we go. And it'll automatically customize the language before and after, and then you can just type in what you want right here. You can give your records request a name and then click send. So I just wanted to show everybody that, because we wanted to make one of the main purposes of this webinar to give all of you the tools to also do what we do, either together or in groups or by yourself. So Mamta, if you want to submit a records request on the 1033 program, either by yourself or work with us on it, that would be awesome. It would be really important and really beneficial to this work too. Sorry for taking us a couple minutes over.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you, Akil, and thanks for. Yeah, I've never really used Muckrock, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, any kind of closing thoughts or anything anyone wants to share before I wrap up?
Just want to quickly announce next Tuesday's meeting. That'll be so we are going to be the first Tuesday of the month. We're changing gears a little bit because we will alternate between webinars. The first Tuesday, Chela, do you want to talk about what the plan is for the next Tuesday about a working meeting? If you want to unmute.
Yes. Hey all. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we will be switching gears And instead of doing one full on webinar every month, we are doing one webinar 1 month, and then the next month we'll do an internalized dialogue around gender and sexuality. Just to be honest, me and the other person, Mariela Saba, who is a coordinating team member, who's done more than I could ever. We both thought it would be better, and because it's a few reasons, but yeah. So next week will be our month off. While in April we'll come right back for another for a webinar in April. So yeah, just let you know. And yeah.
Thank you, Chilla. And
Mhm.
that is for the first Tuesday of the month. The other 3 Tuesdays, the second Tuesday, the War on Youth, and the third Tuesday, general meeting, and the fourth Tuesday, data driven, is going to continue. But in March, it's going to be more internal meeting around gender and sexuality. And please send us an email if folks are interested, because we want to keep that open as well. But it's really about the internal workings that of the coalition and LACAN and various other organizations and individuals. So thank you, Shakir. That was just the announcement.
Okay, well then, yeah, I don't have anything else either. Thanks, everyone.
And the recording of this would be up on the website by Friday. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.